Hey everybody, Roger here. So I thought I'd take some time. I had a few minutes. Thought I'd share something that I think might be helpful to many people. Um, this is a bit personal, and I am a very private person, so this is kind of difficult for me to talk about. But I've noticed something that I've struggled with for years, on and off, has become something that many people struggle with. And so through reflection and reading and study and life and listening to others, I've gained a few practices that have helped me, and I thought I'd just share those with you. So if you know from the video title, this video is about doubt, dealing with uncertainty in life. I don't just mean doubt in the sense of about religious things, though it can mean that and has meant that for me. I mean dealing with uncertainty about life. We can't always have every answer for every problem. We can't always know every outcome for every choice we take. And this has become sort of paralyzing for a lot of people. And I've noticed in pop culture and through talking to so many people struggle with depression and despair and uncertainty. And I can really relate to that. I can say I've made some changes in my life, and even recently made more changes that have really helped me more. And I'll just share a few of those things with you. So I know I have, by the way, thanks again for listening to this. If you don't know me face to face and you found these videos on the internet, thank you again. I am going to try to make more videos for those who are interested about the great books and culture, history, religion, faith, in this crazy world, things like this. So if you have found me on the internet, some of you are atheists, some of you are Christians of various stripes, and other worldviews. I think perhaps this might be something that you might find useful, whether you're a secular person or a religious person. So what do we mean when we talk about certainty in life? What do we mean when we talk about doubt? The word doubt can mean different things, and I'll talk about it from a Christian religious perspective in a moment. But I think so many people seem to doubt whether or not there's just meaning in life at all. Life can be very painful. Life can hurt, and people sort of struggle with whether or not it's worth living. I've lost friends, I think we all have at this point, and I can understand the despair. Sometimes we make decisions, we don't know if it's the right one. How can you know, right? And you just wonder if there's anything behind the day-to-day life, the struggle, the work, the hustle, so to speak. So if you're my age, you know this pop sort of emo band called Fall Out Boy. Well, they just put out a new album this year, and on that album, like so many people my age, slightly older and younger, the album seems to question whether there's meaning to life at all. In fact, the album seems to kind of state there's just not. So in one of the songs on the album, the story is told that the young boy didn't see his father but about 3 times a year once his parents divorced. And then in those few moments that he had with his father every year growing up, his dad got cancer. And then the father takes the son and gives him a seashell and says, all of life's answers are in here. And so the boy opens the seashell and says, it's empty. I guess there's nothing, it's meaningless. And so life is sort of this exercise in futility. Life is just a series of tragic happenstances and near misses, and you just try to find some pleasure. And so the album literally says, so I find some pleasure in a quarter pounder with cheese. And that's how we make sense of life. That's a lot of people. I think even a lot of Christians kind of fall into that camp. They hate their job, they're not happy in their family, they're not happy with themselves, and they question a lot of things. There's a lot of pressures on us. And so, man, we just seek pleasure in anything we can do. It's almost as though we try to drown out the pain and the existential dread with stuff. I'm gonna say this at the front. Your life is worth something. You matter. and life can get better if that's something you struggle with. Why do so many people struggle nowadays with this existential sort of dread? Why do we struggle with who we are, what we're supposed to be doing, as so many of us do? Why is that a thing now? So I think that, I've read so much going back from history, philosophy, culture for the last centuries, even for millennia, as much as I could. I think the modern world has reduced people. We used to have a view in Western civilization that's sort of incarnational. It's sort of the spiritual realm and the physical realm connected. It's incarnational. And so as human beings, we are not just a body, but we're also not just a spirit. Those things are connected. So after about 500 years ago, I think there's been a hard split. So a lot of people are materialists. They think that all there is body, matter. And so you can really solve all of your problems through material means. So maybe material pleasures, dopamine, so they reduce the mind to chemicals, things like this. And perhaps if you're sad, all you need is some kind of chemical hit in your brain, and you can get that through products, and you're sort of a consumer. And man, you can get it through pornography, you can get it through a quarter pounder with cheese, you can get it through whatever. If you get this product, if you get this thing, you get that chemical hit, and you'll be happy for a little while, and then you'll be sad again, but then you just get another hit from another product. That's a very sad way of looking at things, and I think that's left a lot of people empty. I've even experienced some of that myself. I like fast food and pop culture, but if that's how you're getting your joy, it's a fleeting thing. On the other hand, you have people who sort of think, oftentimes religious people, who think that the material world is so bad that it's so corrupt, and they just focus purely on the spiritual, or they try to the neglect of the physical, and they wonder why things don't jive. Well, it's because you have a body, and your emotions are tied to a body. And I'll give some just practical advice in a moment. I want to say this. So I've told you before, the first philosophy book that I bought that I didn't have to buy, right, was this guy. This is William James. This is the Varieties of Religious Experience. Now, William James was the American philosopher who came up with the first originally American philosophy, they tell us, and that is pragmatism. And no, I'm not a pragmatist as a worldview, but I do think he has something interesting to say. Not so much in this book, ironically, the first one I bought. I bought this from a bookstore, I think, that is no longer in business. That's how long ago this was. But Borders bookstore, if you remember that. But in this book, this is a couple of essays. You can get this pretty cheaply. And this was actually a debate between a gentleman named William Clifford and then William James, who was a Protestant, a fairly liberal Christian who taught at an Ivy League school, a psychologist, philosopher. But really what these guys are wrestling with is William Clifford argues that he's an atheist. And spoiler alert, I read this in a graduate class, and the night before the paper was due, I had to write a paper on this. I thought I sided with William Clifford. I thought, man, he's right in this particular issue. And I was somewhat through my paper the night before I was finishing it up, and I realized, okay, I think William James is correct in this. And I had to rewrite the paper. I think I turned it in late. But out of good conscience, I had to be like, okay, I can't defend William Clifford's arguments. But at first, they sound convincing. And you've probably heard something like this too. So William Clifford, an atheist, he starts off his argument here in his essay, The Ethics of Belief. This is written in 1879. And this just tells you how long the modernist doubts have been intruding upon the Western mind. So this essay is about the ethics of belief. And he says, a ship owner was about to send to sea an immigrant ship. He knew she was old and not over well built at the first, and she had seen many seas and climes, and often had needed repairs. Doubts had been suggested to him that possibly she was not seaworthy. These doubts preyed upon his mind and made him unhappy. He thought, and perhaps he ought to have her thoroughly overhauled and refitted, even though this should be of great expense to him. Before the ship sailed, however, he succeeded in overcoming these melancholy reflections. He said to himself that she had gone safely through so many voyages and weathered so many storms that it was idle to suppose that she would not come safely home from this trip also. He would put his trust in Providence, which could hardly fail to protect all these unhappy families that were leaving their fatherland to seek for better times elsewhere. And of course, in this example, the ship sinks and all hands and cargo are lost. And William Clifford holds the ship owner to account for this. So William Clifford says this gentleman knew that even though he had some reason to think the ship might be seaworthy because of past history, he had some reason to doubt that it might not make it this time. But he calmed those melancholy reflections and he sent the ship to sea, and all hands are lost, and we got to hold him accountable. And so the argument he begins to make is pretty simple. Basically, William Clifford says that essentially that if you're not darn near certain of something so big as religion, then you can't expect yourself, you'd be wrong to base your soul, other people's souls, your family, your knowledge, your worldview, the way of life on this thing upon which you have occasional doubts or melancholy reflections or things, unless you're certain or darn near certain. He says, to sum up, we may believe what goes beyond our immediate experience because so much of life is not based upon our immediate experience. We do take so much for granted that we were passed on by, for example, and we're going to come back to this, someone studying chemistry, could he or she try to come up with from scratch everything in chemistry that's been discovered in the last centuries? He or she could. He or she would be foolish. He or she would maybe not have the ability to solve all these things like past scientists have. When someone takes a textbook from college, they're going to have to take some knowledge that's been handed to them, right? And try to build on that. It doesn't mean everything's going to be infallible in the knowledge handed to that person or you and me in life, but you do have to take some things for granted. William Clifford says, we may believe what goes beyond our immediate experience only when it is inferred from that experience by the assumption that what we do not know is like what we know. Now, this leads a lot of people to skepticism. This mindset, I think, goes beyond atheism. It's rooted itself in a lot of religious people who are just very skeptical about a lot of things. I think if you look around the world right now, you're going to see people skeptical of our political system, our institutions. You're going to see people skeptical of the scientific establishment. You're going to see people skeptical of just so many things. That goes beyond religion. And people sort of doubt how they can know much of anything, much less religion or their day-to-day lives. And I thought, William Clifford, he makes a valid point. But here's what William James has to say about that. It's really worth reading. His essay is called The Will to Believe, written in 1897. It is highly worth a thoughtful read. It won't take you long, maybe a day or two. But he says this: the greatest empiricist, and that is an empiricist is a person who tries to see the world only through observable evidence. So they only try to make sense of things through typically not just mathematical propositions or logic, but really through observational evidence and data. Now, I would say there's value to that, but that's not the only way of learning about the world, right? So William James says the greatest empiricists, those who only want direct experience, among us are only empiricists on reflection. When left to their instincts, they dogmatize like infallible popes. I think he's right about that. A lot of atheist secular scientists today are very dogmatic about the way they see rights or their model of the universe. They're not just dogmatic about the science that they've observed with evidence. They're dogmatic about a lot more beliefs that they may not even realize they've shoehorned into the worldview. When the Cliffords tell us how sinful it is to be Christians on such insufficient evidence, you don't know the ship is seaworthy, insufficiency is really the last thing they have in mind. For them, the evidence is absolutely sufficient, only it makes the other way. They believe so completely in an anti-Christian order of the universe that there is no living option. Christianity is a dead hypothesis from the start. I think he's right. I think a lot of people who are skeptical, understandably, of religion, a lot of people who tend to be atheists or secular-minded person or just agnostics or don't care, so many of those people say they just need more evidence. But in reality, if they examine their own mind, the evidence is sort of already in for a lot of those people. And it leads towards atheism or a very skeptical agnosticism. And William James, I think, is kind of calling that out. It's like, just examine your own mind. If you think, I just need more evidence, yeah, but you're not exactly being neutral or objective in all of this. You are making a decision to believe and act a certain way, and you think, most of you, that the evidence is already in, and that it leans against Christianity or theism. I think he's absolutely right there. And here's the argument that William James makes. And this is where I think his pragmatism has something meaningful to say about the uncertainty in our own lives. This has actually helped me. Can you know with 100% certainty, without a shadow of a doubt, that every decision you make is the right one? No. Can you, without a shadow of a doubt, with 100% mathematical certainty, 1 + 1 = 2, know that every single thing that you believe or choose to believe about politics, religion, your day-to-day life, your family, how to deal with difficult situations at work or in your family, is the right thing to do? No. No one lives like that because you can't live like that if you're a thoughtful person. If you think about things, you simply can't have certainty about everything. And yet, what you do is you take the best information available to you and you make a decision. And you act on that decision. Because that's what you have to do. So even if you try to be neutral and try to not make a decision, that is in itself, according to William James, is a decision. You are choosing to act or not act on a belief, on a proposition, on a moral, on views of rights, on politics, on voting, on religion, on taking a job, on asking a girl on a date, etc. You have to make decisions, and you have to act upon those decisions. You can't paralyze yourself and live without any sense of courage and have no chest, as C.S. Lewis would say, and be paralyzed by uncertainty your whole life. You can't. In fact, you won't. You will make decisions and you will act upon them. And that's what William James points out. The evidence to James is sufficient for belief in God, for belief in Christianity for William James. And what he points out is that so much of the knowledge that we have is handed to us by people who came before us. I think that's simply the case. And we can, within a certain realm of margin of error, trust so much of that. For example, I don't have to reinvent Newtonian physics, if I'm even smart enough to come up with that. It works. It's been shown mathematically to work, but it's been shown to work in so many situations. And then on the levels where those physics fall apart, we have other mathematical models that make sense at the quantum level, for example. And those work. And until I have reason to reject those things, I can trust that they have some sort of truth to that, right? Even though the smartest person on the planet can't know every single thing about physics, about even the quantum realm, there's going to be an end to human knowledge at some point. And one thing I'd like to point out is that scientists already know that. It's interesting to me that scientists, several of them who are secular people, secular men, I'm thinking of people specifically, are saying, as much as they want reason and science and not religion or faith, they're already saying we might be coming to the end of human knowledge and what we can know about certain phenomenon. the universe is just beyond the human mind. It's much greater, it's much bigger, it's more expansive, it's much more beautiful, and we're going to be left at some point with mystery. No, I'm not trying to shoehorn my religious beliefs into that mystery, but my point is there is an end to human knowledge. It doesn't mean we have to doubt all human knowledge, but at the end of the day, the smartest minds won't have every answer. And that's what William James... Hey, Future Roger, jump in here for a moment to clarify a point, just to make sure it's very clear. So the point here, again, is that scientists like Lawrence Krauss, various physicists are starting to realize that with the vastness of the universe, with quantum mechanics, all these things, we might sadly be reaching the end of the human mind's capacity to gather information and process it. There are things that are just so mysterious in the universe, and this is for scientists who are non-believing secularists, that you're going to be left with mystery. So the universe is a strange place, whether you're a Christian or an atheist, if you start to think things through. If you just live with your day-to-day life of consumerism, you may not notice, but if you think things through, the universe is a strange place. What I'm not saying is that atheism and theism are on equal grounds and you pick one and go with it. I don't think that's the case. Atheism, if you know me, you know I've considered it very, very thoroughly. Atheism is less able to account for or make sense of not just one certain element of the universe that we experience as humans, like beauty. Though atheism, I think, really fails to account for beauty or charity. It has to reduce those things again to materialist atheism, has to reduce those things to material. So beauty is simply something we're evolved to enjoy for some survival benefit. It's neurons firing in the brain to give you some kind of a chemical to help you react to something that is something to do for your immediate survival. That's not beauty. That's not charity, that's not love. Love is more than that, and so is beauty. But more than that, atheism can't make sense of not just those elements on their own, but how everything fits together. Theism simply makes more sense of so many of the things that we experience as humans: love, beauty, charity, why we exist at all, why there is something rather than nothing, etc. So, though both views, Christianity and atheism, will be left with mystery, I think atheism does fail and simply can't make sense of things like theism. Theism has better explanatory scope. It can make better sense of the data and make better sense of more of the data. But, that being said, my point here is that in life, you won't have every bit of information available to you at all times. No one does. No human being ever has. And yet, we must do the best we can with the data that we have available. Whether it's making a decision at work, whether if you're put in charge of people, making a decision for those people, if you're in charge of writing policy or being a manager, sometimes you have to make decisions knowing you might have to adjust or revise or change paths or make mistakes. If you're in the military and you have to be in charge of people, sometimes you have to do the best you can knowing things are going to happen. Same thing for relationships, on and on. So for me, coming back to religion for a moment, I do think this is a considered opinion, a belief, a conviction, a way of life. I took a long time to consider Christ. I think Christ is true. But the Bible is a strange book, and Christ's teachings are strange and challenging. I think he's true. But for me to choose Christianity, to choose Christ, I did not have to wait until I had every single question answered. I didn't have to wait until I saw with perfect clarity every component of Christian theology, of Christian history, of why this happened 1,000 years ago, of which model of the atonement is correct, which I chose Christ, and I try to follow his teachings imperfectly. On top of that, many will disagree, but I am convinced, I don't think it's even a question in my mind, that the Catholic Church is Christ's church. It's simply the church that he founded 2,000 years ago. So I'm in. I chose Christ. I realize this is his church. I'm in. That's it. There's no turning back. But do I have perfect clarity about all things in the Catholic Church, the Catholic teaching? I don't know that I ever will. So if you're a Muslim person, I could say explain God, and you can give me doctrinal, helpful insights, but can you explain God? Of course not. God's bigger than that. If you're a Christian person, I would say explain the Trinity to me. Now, can you give me true statements about the Trinity? Insight? Yeah. But can you explain the dual natures of Christ to me? You can tell me something about how they work, about what's true and what's not true, but can you really tell me all about the hypostatic union, as the word theologians use? Of course not. Nor can I tell you everything about the Eucharist. I know it's true, and I can tell you helpful things about it. I can tell you doctrinally true things, but can I tell you everything about it? No. So the point being, again, for me to choose Christ, for me to choose his church, that hasn't entailed me waiting until every single point of confusion or obscurity becomes crystal clear. As I'll say later in the video, that didn't happen for Paul. Paul knew there were things he didn't understand. And so the larger point is, in life, though I think if you're an atheist, you really should reconsider. You are always going to have to act, because belief is more than an intellectual proposition. Belief, real belief, true belief, will change the way that you live. And sometimes you have to act and live faithfully to what you've chosen, knowing full well that you won't always have every answer. And that takes courage. But that's what we have to do. I just wanted to clarify that, and we'll go back to Past Roger to continue talking here. Just pointing out, don't expect yourself to have every answer about every question you've ever had. Do the best you can with the knowledge handed to you and with the evidence you have available. And then upon that, you act. So if you're a man, you have to raise your children as something. You can't raise them as nothing. You can't leave them to others to raise. You have to be a man. You have to be a father. I have to be a father. And I have to raise my children something. And raise them with as much as I've tried and the best of my ability to understand the universe. Raise them with, in my mind, the Christian faith, the historic Christian faith, and show them how it applies to their everyday life. I can't give them totally objective secularism, because secularism isn't objective. It's certainly not objective. I think even the secularists at this point sort of realize that. So I have to act. I am responsible for the decisions that I make with the best information that I have. And that's the point William James makes. And it's a really interesting thing. There's so much more that could be said about that. But I think it's worth thinking about. So I'd like to talk about this now I'll give some just really practical advice in a moment. I'm not an expert. I can just share some things with you. I'll share a little bit about my personal life, and then I'll give you some things that have helped me. But I want to talk about it from a religious perspective for just a moment. So I started going to church regularly as a teenager, to a Baptist church, and I knew I needed God in my life, right? That wasn't a question in my mind at the time. And I really absorbed all the ways of life and practices that these fundamentalist-leaning Baptists had, and I tried to learn everything I could that they had to teach. And to this day, I'm grateful for so much of it, though I can't say I agree with all of it now. But I am grateful for the good things. But at some point, I began to sort of doubt So fundamentalists often, unfortunately, they see Christianity as a package, and with that package, they put in some of their, they don't know, but sort of modern beliefs from the last 100 years, 50 years, 200 years, that are not a part of the original Christian vision. And they see all of that, and they really, I think they're kind of walking back from this now, but they used to, when I was coming up, like if one part of this is wrong or false, the whole thing's false. That was detrimental to me because I began to see some of this stuff I can't believe some of these things. And I won't go into that. I don't want to insult anybody, but some of those things that the fundamentalist Baptists taught me, I thought, I can't have blind faith and accept this against direct evidence or without evidence. I need something more. And if this part's false and that part's false, maybe the whole system collapses. And I never became an atheist, but I've told you before, I struggled with that. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a neat, tidy timeline. It wasn't like I was being, you maybe could accuse me of hypocrisy, but it wasn't as though I was like, hey, I don't believe this. It was more of I am wrestling through this. I'm going to hold to what I know, God, Christ. But I'm really struggling with some of these things, and I need to step back and really think it through. And there were times, you can ask my wife, there were times of despair, just existential crisis and anger. And I struggled even to not be bitter. I think that's something that a lot of people my age can relate to. And I don't fault those people who are older than me that passed on the good things to me. I'm grateful for that. I think they were doing what they knew. And I might disagree with some of the things, but I think they were doing the best they could to pass me something good. And some of those people invested time in me and love in me, and I appreciate that. I don't fault them at all. But for me, and so many of the people I know who've left the faith or have struggled, it sort of left us in a crisis. What do you do? Now, for me, that was related to faith versus non-faith. Atheism, refusing to believe in God, or just not knowing or caring, or believing in God and acting upon that belief. For so many people, that might be something simple, like, I hate my job, and I don't know what the point of my life is, so I'm just going to play video games all the time and work because I have to, and maybe I'll try to have some kind of political ideology to give myself to make it feel like I'm doing something in the world. And people are just depressed, and they've sort of replaced religion with shallow, angry ideologies and materialist, consumerist pleasures, quarter pounders with cheese. And those people, I feel for them. If that's you, I can understand. But you don't have to live that way. There is more. So even in the Bible, so sometimes the fundamentalists, when I had problems, though some were kind to me and just didn't have answers. And I'm thinking of a pastor with whom I did some work, and he's a good man. I saw the man love people and be charitable to people behind closed doors when no one would know. He had nothing to gain from it. And people treated him so poorly. And he loved them anyway and did what he could to do the best for them. I will never forget that, because I know that man loves people. But I think of other fundamentalist preachers when I asked questions. Boy, the simple fact that you had a question was a cardinal sin. And just mock you, embarrass you, publicly try to embarrass you. And then when people leave the faith, they just become arrogant, acting like they had nothing to do with it. That's unfortunate. So if I look in Scripture is not a kid's book. It's not a fairy tale. It's very gritty. And it shows people in ancient cultures, different times, but struggling with life. And you're going to see the heroes of the faith, I think even the saints in post-biblical times, struggle with so many things in life. I was listening to Mr. Rogers' wife, in an interview, and she said, people act like he's a saint, but Mr. Rogers, a man who I have a lot of respect for, he wasn't a saint because he worked so hard at being this gentle and kind and patient and loving and listening to children and making sure those children knew that they were loved and listened to. And I think saints work at this. The saints weren't born, at least the vast majority of them, as far as I can tell, they weren't born in this state of near perfection. They were born and they struggled. And by the grace of God, they overcame those things and were able to help other peoples and do phenomenal things. Think of Thomas in the Bible. Thomas was a person who was so close to Jesus Christ. And yet Thomas doubted. He's called Doubting Thomas. And when I read that story, when I was going through my struggles, I was just like, I don't know if I believe this. I don't know. But I can relate to this man. And Thomas, when after Jesus was crucified, and he was dead. So the person that Thomas thought was going to be the king and usher in this new era for Israel and be the savior of his people in a hard time, he was crucified like a common criminal, mocked and buried. And Thomas thought, it's all a lie. Everything I've given my life to, I gave up everything for this. And maybe he was a liar. This has all been a lie. But what was Jesus' response to Thomas? It was gracious. So I'm going to ask you to be gracious with yourself if you have questions. By the way, sometimes questions and not understanding things fully is not necessarily a doubt. But be gracious with yourself. So Jesus came to Thomas and he said the exact same thing Thomas has said that he needed. Unless I see the wounds in his hands and his side. When people told Thomas, hey, Jesus is alive again, we've seen him. We've seen his body. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't a hallucination. We've seen his body. The man is alive. Thomas said, yeah, I want to take your word for it. But unless I see the wounds where I saw them pierce his side and his hands, unless I see his wounded body, I'm not going to believe. And so what does Christ do? He shows up to Thomas and he says, Thomas, peace be to you. Look at the wounds in my hand. Look at the wounds in my side. And so there are people in the Bible who doubt John the Baptist, the man who preached Christ the loudest. When it came time to die for Christ, I think asked the question, are you really the one? I think Paul in the New Testament, I don't know that he doubted Christ once he made that firm decision, but he definitely took time to think it through, count the cost, make sure he understood what he believed. He was a dedicated Jewish person who hated, frankly, Christianity, and when he believed he saw the risen Christ appear to him on the road, changed his life, broke his mind. Not the fact that his mind was insane, but the fact that the way he saw the world, he now had to adjust that. His paradigm had been altered. Maybe Jesus is the Messiah. In fact, it wasn't a maybe to Paul at that point. He just said, Lord, what would you have me do? But after that, he took time to think it through, and he went and talked to the apostles. And then in Romans, you see him saying, yeah, but I still struggle with, I know this is true, I believe this, but my body wants to do other things. And he says in, I think, Corinthians, now we see through a glass darkly. In the ancient world, mirrors weren't particularly clear. And so Paul said, I can't understand fully everything about God and Christianity. This is Paul. But one day I'll see it clearly, face to face. But right now I'm seeing it through a sort of a dim mirror. I know it's true, I can see it, but I can't see everything. And that's Paul. And then there's Peter. Peter went further than I hope you or I would go, but he denied Christ. He certainly doubted. And I think had some cowardice in a hard moment. And yet, Christ had mercy with all of those people. Abraham, the list goes on and on. Have some grace with yourself. I think that's a scriptural picture. So, this isn't for everyone, but for those of you who don't know, I'm a Catholic. I'm an adult convert to Catholicism, which I'm finding out is more and more widespread thing, which is fascinating to me, and it makes sense. But in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which I would recommend that you take some time to read charitably and thoughtfully, whether you're an atheist or an evangelical, he talks about the Catechism talks about doubt, different kinds of doubt, and then it sort of contrasts that with faith and hope. And that's where I'm going to try to lead the conversation with some practical notes. So our moral life, according to the Catechism, has its source of faith in God, who reveals his love to us. St. Paul speaks of the obedience of faith as our first obligation. Now, we're going to come back to this, but that obedience of faith in the New Testament, I don't think is an intellectual thing. Faith in the New Testament isn't, I merely think something is true, as though it's a logical syllogism or a mathematical equation, and that's it. And I have 100% certainty about it. Or, on the converse, I believe whatever I believe against all the direct evidence, but I believe it anyway because I have blind faith. That's just not the faith of the New Testament at all. But the faith in the New Testament does involve obedience. That's explicitly scriptural. He shows that ignorance of God is a principle and explanation of moral deviations. In other words, things that we don't understand or hold true or see this light in our minds and hearts can lead to deviation from what the ancient Greek philosophers would call the good. The first commandment, well, let's just skip down. Voluntary doubt about faith disregards or refuses to hold as true what God has revealed and the church proposes for belief. Involuntary doubt refers to hesitation in believing, difficulty in overcoming objections connected with the faith, or also anxiety aroused by its obscurity. So things we can't see, as Paul said, with perfect clarity. You can have anxiety about that at times. I think that might be something about what Paul was mentioning. But if deliberately cultivated, doubt can lead to spiritual blindness. So I'm going to ask something of you. If you have doubts about the faith, or about what's good in life, this is a hard thing to say, but I've seen this sometimes in my own heart festering, and I'm going to ask you to think about it. If you want to wallow in your own pain, your own doubt, your own uncertainty, that's going to lead you to just make bad decisions. It's going to lead you to have spiritual blindness. I think bitterness, despair, anger at God, if those things are deliberately cultivated, not involuntarily but deliberately, they're going to cause you problems. Incredulity is the neglect of revealed truth or the willful refusal to assent to it. But that is contrasted with hope and faith and then charity. Those things that we should be, I think, fostering in our lives. So I'm going to offer you some simple suggestions. Here's some things that have helped me. Now, I have not lived totally all the time, 100%. I've always got it right. I see now the Christian life as a journey. But I think even if you're not a Christian, here's some things that I think might help you. So there are times that I've made vast progress in my life, in my spiritual life, in my emotional state, in the way I see the world. And there are times, even after I've made that progress, when I've faltered. And I think that's when you need to have some grace with yourself. But don't hide that thing, don't foster it, don't deliberately hold on to it. Have some grace with yourself, accept God's grace, and get back on track. Here's some simple things. Your body, your emotions, are not these abstract things floating in the heavens. Your emotions are attached to a mind, a body. that incarnational view, right? Spirit and matter. It's not one or the other, it's both. So many of the doubts that people have today that I've had, maybe wrestling through things from childhood, maybe angry or confused or falling into despair, which is bad for us, but also can be, I think, a sin. So many of those things are affected by not just intellectual propositions, but our emotions. So many people doubt the existence of God because of the problem of evil. Why do so many bad things happen? And I spent so much time at night wrestling with that. How can God, who is good, as the scriptures depict him, as Christians say, allow these bad things to happen? But here's the thing about that. Intellectually, logically, that is solved, and it's not a knockdown, drag-out argument against the existence of God, against Christianity. It's simply not. And frankly, most atheist philosophers that I've read today will acknowledge that. It's not a knockout argument against Christianity. But I think it catches root in people's minds and hearts because it's driven home by emotional despair, by emotional negativity. So here's a practical thing, a few things. Your emotions are bettered by things you do in your body. You can have a better emotional state of well-being if you do things in your practical everyday life. Now, more and more, I think I'm seeing public speakers, public intellectuals, scientists, doctors telling us this. I'm from dermatologists to how to take care of your skin, to self-help gurus. Here's some practical things that I put in my life that have helped my emotional state. And for lack of a better word, have made me, in some sense, happier. Or at least have taken away some of the drive of those emotional struggles. Simple things. You probably already know what I'm going to tell you, and you know to do it. But if it helps, I'm just going to remind you. Go to bed at a decent hour. Do yourself a favor. Treat yourself with some dignity. The way you'd want to take care of your children, take care of yourself. Turn off your phone. Turn off the television at a godly hour. Get some rest. Get some sleep. If you struggle with back pain or sleeping, look into the practical things that help you keep you from sleeping. Maybe you need to stretch your back before you go to bed. Maybe you need to drink a little bit of water. Maybe you need to cut the caffeine out earlier in the day. Things like this. Look into practical things that'll help you get some better sleep. That will help break a cycle of struggling to get up, of relying on caffeine. This sounds so simple and you already know it, but I'm telling you, it'll make your life better. Move your body. One of the problems in the modern world, as you know, is that we tend to be sedentary. And that leads to health problems, that leads to chemical imbalances, that leads to stress buildup. I was in the Marine Corps. PT your body, physical fitness. I don't do that as much as I should, and I'm trying to get back to that place. I enjoy running. I'm not good at it anymore. I was years ago. I'm trying to get back to it. If you lift weights, whatever it is that you do, walk, do something simple. Move your body. It'll help you relieve stress. It will help you sleep better over time. It'll help you rest better, maybe even quickly. Turn off the television, off the Xbox, log off of social media, go outside, move your body. Get some sunshine. It's been shown that sun is something that will just make you, it releases something in the mind that we're just simply designed or evolved to do. Sun will help you be happy. It's just sort of crucial to that. Do your best to go outside. Here's one thing I've done recently, and it's actually helped. Because of the job I have, which I'm grateful for, I can't get outside very often, so don't tell anybody, but I work in a very modern, it's not exactly aesthetically pleasing in the building in which I work. I like what I do, but I don't get sunshine in that building. So I found a field with some trees, and I don't waste my boss's time. I try not to anyway. I mean, I'm not perfect, but I've discovered that if I go out there about once a day and take 5 to 10 minutes and stand in that field don't look at my phone, I just listen to birds, I see the trees, I see the grass and the sunshine, it will change your day to day. Do that. Whether it's sitting outside, get some sunshine. Control your impulses. So, this is a vicious cycle, I think. So many people, because we're depressed and sad and negatively spiraling down, we try to make ourselves happy with a quick dopamine hit with these products. Quarter pounder with cheese, Starbucks. I'm not against those things, but I'm saying those things can lead to you not being able to control your impulses. And then you want that dopamine hit. You want that chemical happiness. And then you associate that with a product. And then when you're sad again, you just want more of that product. Learn to control your impulses. Master your body. Paul talks about this in the New Testament. A really good book. I'd recommend this for all people, but if you're a young man, read the book of 1 John. Read it. Think about it. Learn some self-restraint. And the Stoics are onto this, I think. I can't agree with Stoicism as a worldview, but the fact that they understand some kind of mastery of self. There are some Eastern thinkers who have really caught on to this. Control your desires. This is just I don't mean to be crude or inappropriate, but have some dignity with yourself and towards other people. I do think lust is something that's out of hand. And that leads to a spiral of negative emotions and seeing human beings as things that are less than human beings. Control your lust, control your appetites, control your impulses, and forgive yourself, be gracious with yourself, but work on that, and you'll be better for it. Your life will be a little happier. I will tell you, the times that I've been happiest have correlated. You could say correlation doesn't equal causation, but I don't think it's coincident that some of the times I've been happiest in my life were the times I was not eating a lot of fast food and junk food, was getting a lot of sleep, and was exercising quite a bit. Give your body the right fuel. So much of happiness, you're not going to feel happy if your body feels like junk. If you just give your body junk, which I know all about, you're going to feel like junk. If you eat things that give healthy fats and healthy proteins and healthy vegetables and vitamins, I think your body will have what it needs to feel a little better. That's a thing. I'm going to recommend this also. I'm going to highly recommend you try to enrich your life with things like high culture. I don't mean be pretentious, but I mean go to an art museum. Look at the classic, don't just browse them, but consider some of the great works from history. You can enrich your life that way. Don't just listen to junky music. Put some good music in your life, some music that might take some work to reflect on and understand, be it Bach or Mozart or Beethoven. I'm telling you, that can enrich your life. It may not be for everyone, but it can enrich your life. Read books from world history that have changed the world. Those are not books that are easy to digest. They're work like anything else in life that's worth work. Marriage is worth work. To have a good marriage, it takes work, but it's worth it. So is expanding your mind. I've read so many things, but they were struggles for me. I wasn't a good reader as a teen because I just couldn't understand the words on the page. But over time, I learned how to understand what these great thinkers from the past are saying, whether in literature or philosophy. Pull out those ideas from that book, wrestle with them, and see how they fit in discussions with other great thinkers. That can only enrich your mind and expand your life. Expand your mind. Do that. I'm going to say this also, and I've said it before, but I wouldn't tell you if I didn't believe it. Read the Bible as an adult. Read it. Read the Gospels. Read Matthew. Read John. Read Romans. Read Paul. Don't expect to understand it all. I would say do it with the help of the wisdom of the past. But consider Christ. Read Matthew and John. Read 1 John. If that's all you do, read those. Consider those things. It'll do you better. Read Scripture. And I'm going to say this also. If you are a person who doubts the faith, go to church. Don't make excuses for yourself. Go to church. Because you live in a body, and your body, I think, should worship. And the more you live out your Christian faith, not just in here, but in your life, involving your body and giving to charity and worshiping God and communing with others, the better off you'll be. Now, this is a bit personal. All those things have helped me with doubt and uncertainty and despair. Because confidence comes with experience. And even though I have evidence for the life of Jesus, there's historical evidence surrounding that man's life. I think he was not just a man. There are parts of the Christian faith, let's say life after the death of our bodies. I think there's more. I think your life matters. What you do in this life matters. And I think that after this body ends, there's more. No, I can't prove that, even though there are arguments for it. Plato makes arguments for that. What I can do is look at the evidence surrounding things I can make sense of. Just as an example, there's good reason to think that Jesus of Nazareth existed and was crucified, that his followers believed, at least, that he was resurrected. And you can flesh that out, but you can examine evidence behind that if you'd like. And sort of those mountains can inform the valleys, the things that I can't see, because they're things that all of us can't see. What I do know can inform the things I don't know. For example, I know I love my wife. I know it. And because I know I love my wife, I can't see the future. I can't see every single thing that she and I will choose. But I know I love my wife, and in some sense, that thing I know informs the valley of what I don't know about the future. I kind of trust in that relationship. I hope that makes some sense to you. That same thing is true, I think, for religion, philosophy, the things that we have to do and act upon in our day-to-day lives. And so one of the things that I've done is, as a Catholic, I try to partake in the sacraments as often as I can. And that's a way for me to put my money where my mouth is and not just hold something intellectually, but live it and believe it. And I got to say, it's helped. So if you are a Catholic, go to confession. I just like to, I'm not an expert. I'm not your father confessor, but I'd like to encourage you, partake in the sacraments when you can. I simply believe, based on what I know, in the valley of what I don't know, that it'll be good for you. I can say, frankly, I think it's already been good for me. If you are a non-believer, if you're an atheist, I would still encourage you. Go visit a cathedral. Go to a mass. Don't partake in the mass, but go and just immerse yourself in the beauty of it and the meaning behind it, and reflect on that for a while. If you go to Europe, man, go to some of those old great cathedrals over there. There's so many. It'll do you some good. See, those cathedrals aren't just museums. They're very old, but they're still being used for a certain purpose. It's a very meaningful one, and I think it'll help you. So you and I have to act. We have to act on the best that we know. We can't paralyze ourselves into uncertainty and have no courage. We have to act on the best that we know. But we can inform our views with history and science, and I think the scriptures and philosophy, art and culture. We can enrich our lives and then act upon those things. And if we do those things, I think trusting in the grace of God, partaking in that grace, and then doing simple things to make our day-to-day lives better, your life will be better for it. If you're sad and depressed, I'd like to encourage you to just try some of these things. But I'd like to end with this, a simple reminder that you matter. Somebody somewhere loves you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video again. Hope it's been interesting to you. I'd like to recommend again that you read William James' The Will to Believe. I would say take some time to read through the Catechism. It's just a worthwhile thing. And I hope maybe some of these practices might help you out. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch these videos and spend some time with me in the library. I will try to make some more videos soon. God bless you.